Welcome to the Doing Jewish podcast. I am Avi Farkas, and we will discuss various Shabbat practices. Well, really any Jewish practices, but we are currently discussing Shabbat practices, traditions, and customs, and really anything you'll see at any observant Jewish home on Friday night and Shabbat, or you're looking to grow your Shabbat experience and your Shabbat practices. Hopefully these are things that they may find their way into your home at some time in the future. So these are the typical classic Shabbat practices and what a Shabbat looks like from my experience. And as we go through Shabbat, we hopefully will finish discussing the basics of Shabbat, and we'll move on to various other Jewish practices. But until then, we will dive right into this week's topic, which is the Challah. Challah is that special bread, those loaves of bread that we bake. Jews bake before Shabbat, and we eat it at the Shabbat dinner table, Friday night and Shabbat day. Whenever you have a meal on Shabbat, you would eat Challah. Presumably, every Jew knows what Challah is. Any Jew with some background likely knows what Challah is. If you don't, then I'm glad you're here. We'll teach you all about it. Challah is delicious. Challah is iconic. Challah is traditionally baked with 6 braids braided into each other. And then on Friday night, you would take 2 challahs together and you would hold them up together and then make a blessing, the typical blessing that we make on bread, motzi lechem min haaretz, on these 2 loaves of challah, and that's one of the ways we begin our festive meal on Shabbat. The 6 braids, some say, represent the 6 of the 12 tribes, and we take 2 loaves of bread, each with 6 braids, to represent all 12 tribes, and how they're woven into each other and they're braided into each other, and we take them together. And that shows that the only way to come into Shabbat, the only way to become together with God when God descends into our home and joins us for the Shabbat meal, the only way to get to that point is to bring the entire Jewish nation, all 12 tribes, together as one and make a blessing that way. Most people think that the term Challah is synonymous with Shabbos, and it's rooted in Shabbos, and there is some truth to that, which we will discuss later on. But the truth is that what Challah really is a commandment that God gave to the Jewish people, and we find it in the Bible, Numbers chapter 15, verses 19 to 21. The verse says, "When you eat from the bread of the land, you shall set aside a gift for the Lord. The first portion of your dough you shall separate a loaf for a gift. As is in the case of the gift of the threshing floor, so shall you separate it. From the first portion of your dough you shall give a gift to the Lord in all your generations." And that is when the Torah, the Hebrew word that the Torah uses in that commandment is challah. That the Torah calls that loaf that you designate for God, the Torah calls that loaf challah. So while challah does mean a loaf of bread, the term challah is used in the Torah, is used in the Bible as a term for the challah that we separate from a dough that we bake, and we give it to the Kohen. In the times of the temple, they would actually separate it and give it to the priest, to the Kohen, who would then eat it. The Kohen was the one who was the destination for many gifts, because the Kohanim were not permitted, the priests were not permitted to do work to earn a living, because they were devoted to community service, to service in the temple and other community services, and therefore the loaf of bread that we remove when we bake a batch of bread was given to the Kohen. Today we're not sure who's permitted to eat the bread, who's ritually pure, who's ritually impure, and various other complications. And therefore, today, observant Jews separate the piece of dough that we would give to the Kohen, and then we destroy it. We either burn it or wrap it up and throw it out. That is what we do today. So this is a special mitzvah, a special commandment in regards to baking bread. That when you bake a batch of bread, when you need a batch of dough, you separate a piece of challah. Anyone who's been to a challah bake or possibly an observant Jewish woman's home when they were baking bread may have seen this process. It's a very nice process. It's a special time to pray. It's an auspicious time to pray, and it's something that is very, very common amongst observant Jews. So what's the connection to Shabbos? This mitzvah of taking challah, this commandment of taking challah, is considered one of the mitzvahs that are a special mitzvah for a woman to perform. Now, women have many mitzvahs, and this mitzvah can be performed by a man or a woman. However, there's a special significance to a woman performing the mitzvah. We find by the matriarchs, Sarah and Rebecca, that they baked challah, and there was a special blessing of sustenance in their bread that they baked. And when Rebecca was suggested to Isaac as a potential suitable match for him, Isaac actually tested Rebecca with seeing if her bread or her challah that she baked would carry the same blessing as his mother Sarah. And therefore, when he saw that Rebecca's bread had the same blessing as his mother, that's when he said that he decided that she was righteous enough to be a matriarch of the Jewish nation. So we see the concept of challah and the mitzvah of challah having playing an important role in the woman's commandments, in a woman's mitzvah, and that's why challah. One of the reasons why challah became synonymous with being a woman's mitzvah. Another reason why, and this is going to connect to Shabbos, is if you think about Shabbos, about the days of creation. So the sixth man, Adam and Eve, were created on the sixth day of creation, which is Friday, and Adam and Eve sinned with the sin of the tree of knowledge on the sixth day of creation, right before Shabbat. For those of you who don't know, the true culprit of the sin of eating of the tree of knowledge belongs to Chava. Eve, was actually the true culprit. She was the one who was persuaded by the serpent to eat from the fruits of the tree of knowledge, and she, not being able to bear that she would be the only one to be thrown out of the garden, she persuaded Adam to eat from the tree of knowledge also, and she actually caused him to sin. Because of the role that Eve played in the sin of the tree of knowledge, the sin of the Eitz Hadas, Eve is considered to have brought a darkness onto the world, and this darkness came about on Friday, and therefore the women of the Jewish nation, the women of the world, specifically the women of the Jewish nation, took it upon themselves to rectify the sin of the tree of knowledge, that specifically the aspect of the sin that Eve was responsible for. And one of the ways they do this is by baking challah. A man is symbolic. Man as in a human. Humans are symbolic in Kabbalistic teachings as considered a challah. They're considered like just like we remove a piece of dough from a bit larger dough. Humans are like a piece of the world that was removed in order to form something more elevated and more special. And I don't really understand what it means, but the general concept is that humans were created as a part of the world to elevate the world, and therefore, when Adam and Eve sinned, they brought humanity down a level in spirituality, and therefore, we want to take off challah, which is the concept of challah is removing something from a larger portion of something physical and elevating it. So when we take off challah, we elevate that little piece by using it for charity. We give it as a gift to the Kohen, to the priests. We essentially elevate that piece of dough, and that elevates the world, and it allows humans, mankind, to elevate the world and to bring out the spirituality and to rectify the sin of Adam and Eve. So that's something that's special that we do on Friday. And one of the reasons why challah became synonymous with Shabbos is actually because of this. We bake challah on Friday specifically in order to perform this mitzvah, this commandment, to rectify the sin of Eve. Now, Another reason why it's special is because we want to use on Shabbos, on Shabbat for the meal. Since Shabbat is an elevated day, it's a day that God comes to our home and partakes in the Shabbat meal with us, as it were. We want to use foods that are elevated, and a plain loaf of bread is a very special thing. However, if a mitzvah was performed with that loaf of bread, it elevates it even higher. And therefore, it is preferable to use challah that was baked by a Jew, and therefore is obligated in the mitzvah of challah, and the mitzvah of challah was performed on it, and that dough, therefore, that bread is therefore elevated, and therefore it's even more worthy of being used for the Shabbat dinner. Another reason why we bake challah for Shabbat dinner is just as an honor for the special guest. We want to make sure to have fresh challah, fresh bread, just as if you had a royal dignitary, a queen or a king or someone special showing up for a meal at your house, you would want to have something fresh for them to eat. There's a number of customs surrounding the challah, and I'll discuss two of them now, and these are both connected, and they come from the same source. One is that we traditionally place the challah on a plate or on a tray, on a challah tray, and we cover it with something called a challah cover. Who would have thunk? We cover it with a challah cover. Many Jewish homes have very elaborate, pretty challah covers and challah trays, and we have a tray under it and a cover on top of it, and we traditionally use 2 loaves of challah, and we make the blessing holding them together. So why do we do this? The reason is because in the wilderness, when the Jews were wandering in the desert, God sent a special heavenly spiritual food called the man, or manna, the man, and the man fell every single day except for on Shabbos. And on Friday, 2 portions fell, and the Jews were expected to take 2 portions and save 1 portion for Shabbat. That's how they had food on Shabbos, was by collecting the portion on Friday and eating it on Shabbos. By our Shabbos table, we take 2 loaves of challah to represent the two portions, the double portion of man that fell on Friday, and to remind us the important aspect of why the man fell on Friday. The man fell on Friday for 2 reasons. One reason is because God does not want us gathering our food on Shabbos. He wants us to rest on Shabbos. And the second reason, which is really connected to the first one, is the importance of preparing before Shabbos for Shabbos, which is really one reason. It's the importance of resting on Shabbos, and the way you rest is not by sitting around and doing nothing, but also not by doing everything last minute, preparing your meal 2 seconds before the meal starts. Rather, it's by preparing in advance, preparing early, and having a calmness. Lesson and the message from the man is that we start preparing on Friday morning. We collect 2 portions, and we have our food already for Shabbos prepared on Friday. The custom of covering and baking the challah, and we bake the challah because otherwise it would be gross. But the custom of covering the challah and putting it on a tray also comes from the man, because it says that the man had a layer of dew under it so it wouldn't get dirty, and a layer of dew on top of it to protect it. So because the man had a layer under it and a layer over it, we traditionally put a tray under it and a cover over it to represent the man. The concept of challah, when I think about challah, it just brings me this wafting smell of deliciously freshly baked bread that my mother used to make, and the sincerity of my mother as she was leaning over the challah bowl, as she was making the blessing on the special mitzvah of taking off a piece of challah, and she would concentrate and pray for all kinds of different things. She would pray for us, her children. She would pray for various needs in the Jewish people, and then she would take off the challah, and then she would put it away and braid the challah. It was always a sight to see, watching my mother make challah, baking it, smelling it, and then on the freezing cold winter nights in Toronto, where I grew up, coming home, having my fingers and toes frozen into icicles and trying to thaw them out, and sitting down by the Shabbos table and biting into a delicious, warm, steaming, hot challah, there's no words. You have to experience it. And that's all I could say. I wish you all the best of luck in incorporating this practice, if you can, into your Shabbat day and Shabbat schedule. Thank you very much for listening to the Doing Jewish podcast. If you enjoyed it, please leave a comment. If you have any ideas, if there's anything that you want me to discuss, you want me to talk about, please leave a comment. And that's it for now.